There are stories told in the taverns of Thornwood, passed from grandfather to grandson, embroidered with each telling until truth and legend become indistinguishable. The transformation of a man they called the Iron Duke, and the village girl who melted a heart everyone believed was frozen beyond redemption. They speak of a duke carved from ice. A man who ruled with brilliance and loneliness. A man who believed emotion was weakness. That man was Alexander Thornwood. They say Duke Alexander Thornwood inherited his title at 19, when his father fell from his horse during a hunt. What they don't tell you is that the old duke was a hard man who raised his son to believe that emotion was weakness, that a ruler must be stone. For 13 years, young Alexander wore that teaching like armor, until the duchy knew him only as a figure carved from ice, brilliant in strategy, merciless in judgment, and utterly, devastatingly alone. And there was a girl, Helena Hartwell, daughter of the village baker, who lost her mother at birth and her father to fever when she was 22. She kept the bakery running, kept the ovens warm, and kept her heart open despite her grief. The village loved her for her kindness and her honey cakes in equal measure. Their worlds should never have touched. But fate, as it often does, arrived on the back of a storm. The morning of the storm, Duke Alexander rose before dawn in his castle chambers, as he always did. Dressed in black and silver, the colors of Thornwood. Ate alone at a table meant for 20. Review petitions with Lord Pemberton, his chief advisor. Inspect the guard. Attend to correspondence. Dine alone. Sleep alone. He was 32 years old and had not smiled in anyone's memory. "Your Grace," Lord Pemberton said that morning, his weathered face creased with concern. "The council wishes to discuss your marriage again." Lady Marguerite Hampton's family grows impatient. Alexander's jaw tightened. Lady Marguerite, beautiful, accomplished, politically perfect. The match everyone expected. The match that made sense. "Tell them I will consider it," he said, his voice flat as winter stone. But that afternoon, restless in a way he couldn't name, the Duke did something unusual. He ordered his horse saddled and rode out alone, leaving his guards behind, seeking the freedom of the forest roads. For a moment, just a moment, he felt almost free. He didn't notice the clouds gathering until the first drops fell. Then the sky cracked open. Rain fell in sheets. Thunder rolled like cannon fire. His stallion reared, hooves striking the air. And Alexander's world spun into mud and darkness. In the village, Helena Hartwell was pulling the last loaves from her oven when the storm broke. Rain hammered the cobblestones, and thunder shook the timbers of her small bakery. She was closing the shutters when she heard it. A horse's terrified scream, the crash of something heavy hitting the ground. A man's groan swallowed by thunder. She grabbed her cloak and ran into the storm. A massive black stallion was rearing in the square, eyes rolling white with fear. And there, sprawled in the mud, was a man in fine clothes, rain plastering dark hair to his face. Helena didn't think. She caught the horse's bridle, speaking low and calm until the animal settled. Then she knelt beside the fallen man. "Sir, can you hear me?" He groaned, trying to rise. Blood seeped from a cut above his eye. "Don't move yet. Can you stand if I help you?" He looked at her then, and Helena felt the shock of his gaze. Gray eyes like winter sky, sharp with intelligence and something else. Pain, perhaps. Or surprise. "I can stand," he said, his voice rough. She got him to his feet, one arm around her shoulders, and half carried him to her bakery. The horse followed, docile now. Inside, she settled the man in her father's old chair by the fire and went to tend the horse in her small stable at the back of her bakery. When she returned, he was staring at the flames, his fine coat steaming, his face unreadable. "You're bleeding," she said, fetching clean water and cloth. "Let me see." He flinched when she touched his forehead, but allowed her to clean the wound. Up close, she could see he was handsome in a severe way, all sharp angles and controlled strength. But there was something lonely about him that made her heart ache. "It's not deep," she said. "You were lucky." "Was I?" His voice held a strange note. Helena smiled. Well, you could have broken your neck. Instead you just got wet and muddy and ended up in a warm bakery with fresh bread. I'd call that lucky. She fetched bread, butter, honey, and hot tea. Set them before him without ceremony. Eat. You've had a shock. He stared at the simple meal as if he'd never seen food before. Then, slowly, he picked up the bread. Tasted it. Something flickered across his face. Surprise, pleasure, something almost like pain. This is very good, he murmured. My father's recipe. He was the best baker in 3 duchies. She sat across from him, cradling her own tea. I'm Helena. Helena Hartwell. Alexander, he replied, after a pause. Just his name, nothing more. They sat in silence, listening to the storm rage outside. Helena found herself studying him, the tension in his shoulders, the way he held himself apart even sitting in her kitchen. Like a man who'd forgotten how to be comfortable. Do you live nearby? She asked. Not far. He set down his cup, met her eyes. Thank you. For your kindness. Anyone would have done the same. No, he said, with absolute certainty. They wouldn't have. The storm passed. He rose to leave, moving carefully, and Helena walked him to the door. The village square was empty, washed clean, and stars were breaking through the clouds. Your horse is in the stable, she said. He should be calm now. Alexander looked at her for a long moment, as if memorizing her face. I am in your debt, Helena Hartwell. No debt, she said firmly. Just, be careful riding home. He mounted his horse with the grace of a man born to the saddle, despite his injury. At the edge of the square, he turned back once. Their eyes met across the distance. Then he was gone, swallowed by the night. Alexander rode back to his castle that night, and though he didn't know it yet, he left something behind in that small bakery, the first brick in the wall around his heart. While Helena stood in her doorway, feeling as if something had shifted in the world. She didn't know his full name. Didn't know who he was. Didn't know that in his castle chambers that night, Alexander Thornwood would lie awake, unable to stop thinking about warm brown eyes and the taste of honey bread and the first genuine kindness he'd known in years. He had no name for the feeling stirring in his chest. But he knew one thing. He would see her again. The Duke returned 3 days later. Helena was kneading dough when the bell above her door chimed. She looked up, flour dusting her hands, and froze. Alexander stood in her doorway. Not in armor. Not in court regalia. But dressed simply, almost humbly. And yet unmistakably noble. And behind him, trying to be inconspicuous, were 2 guards in Thornwood livery. Oh. Helena breathed, understanding flooding through her. Oh, you're... May I come in? He asked, and there was something almost vulnerable in the question. She nodded, unable to speak. The Duke of Thornwood. In her bakery. He stepped inside, the warmth of the bakery softening the hard lines of his face. He seemed to sense her panic. I came to thank you properly. And to... He paused, looking almost uncertain. To purchase bread. If you're willing to sell to me. That broke the spell. Helena laughed, surprising herself. Your Grace, I sell bread to anyone with coin. Even dukes who fall off their horses in storms. For the first time she saw it. A flicker at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile, but close. Then I'll take 6 loaves. And he glanced around her small shop, at the worn but clean surfaces, the herbs hanging from the rafters, the warmth of the ovens. Perhaps you could tell me about your father's recipe. So she did. And somehow, telling him about her father's patient teaching, about learning to feel when the dough was right, about the satisfaction of feeding the village, somehow it felt natural. He listened with an intensity that should have been unnerving but instead felt like being truly seen. You love this work, he observed. I do. It's simple, but it matters. Everyone needs bread. Simple, he repeated, as if tasting the word. Yes. I'd forgotten about simple things. He came back the next week. And the week after. Always with some excuse, ordering bread for the castle, checking on village matters, inspecting the square. But he always ended up in her bakery, sitting in her father's chair, hands wrapped around a cup of tea he never quite finished. They talked. Helena learned that he'd inherited too young, that he'd been raised to suppress every soft emotion, that he carried the weight of 800 years of Thornwood tradition on his shoulders. She learned that he was brilliant and lonely and had forgotten how to be anything but the Duke. Alexander learned that Helena had been educated by the village priest, that she read poetry and philosophy, that she saw the world with a clarity that cut through all his careful defenses. He learned that she was brave and kind and utterly without pretense. And slowly, carefully, like frost melting under spring sunlight, something in him began to thaw. One afternoon, as he watched her braid dough for sweet loaves, Helena spoke without looking up. "You're different when you're here," she said. Softer. The flicker of warmth vanished from his face. "I can't afford to be soft." "Why not?" He hesitated. No one questioned him. No one challenged him. But Helena did. Gently, honestly, without fear. "Because a duke must be strong," he said. "Must be. Stone." She shook her head. "My father used to say that the strongest trees are the ones that bend in the wind. The rigid ones break." He stared at her, something shifting in those winter-gray eyes. "Your father was a wise man." "He was. And he taught me that strength and kindness aren't opposites." She held his gaze. "You could be both, you know, if you let yourself." Alexander left without answering. But that night, alone in his chambers, Alexander Thornwood, the Iron Duke, admitted a truth he had never allowed himself to feel. He was falling in love with a baker's daughter. And it terrified him. At court, the pressure was mounting. "Your Grace," Lord Pemberton said, his voice tight with frustration, "Lady Marguerite's father demands an answer. You've put him off for months." "I'm aware. The alliance with the Hampton family is crucial. Their lands border ours, their wealth could." "I said I'm aware, Pemberton." The old advisor studied him with shrewd eyes. "You've been spending time in the village." It wasn't a question. Alexander's jaw tightened. "I inspect all parts of my duchy. Of course, Your Grace. But perhaps it would be wise to remember your position. Your duty." Duty. The word followed Alexander like a shadow. He knew what was expected. Marry Lady Marguerite, secure the alliance, produce an heir, continue the Thornwood line. 800 years of tradition demanded it. But when he closed his eyes, he saw Helena's smile. Tasted honey bread. Felt, for the first time in his adult life, like he could breathe. Lady Marguerite herself was no fool. Beautiful and ambitious, she'd been raised to be a duchess, and she wanted the position. When she cornered Alexander at a court function, her smile was sharp as a blade. "Your Grace, we should speak plainly." "Should we?" "You've been avoiding me." Avoiding the question everyone knows is coming. She stepped closer, her voice low. "I would make you an excellent duchess. I understand duty, politics, the game we must play. I would never embarrass you or make demands on your affections." It was a perfect offer. A marriage of convenience, of mutual benefit, with no messy emotions to complicate matters. "I will consider it," Alexander said, the words tasting like ash. But that night, he rode to the village. Found Helena closing her shop. And when she looked up and saw his face, she set down her broom and simply waited. "I shouldn't be here," he said. "But you are." "Helena, He stopped, the words catching in his throat. 13 years of training, of suppressing every soft feeling, warred with the truth burning in his chest. "I don't know how to do this." "Do what?" "Feel," he said, the word barely a whisper. "I don't know how to feel without it destroying me." She crossed to him, this brave, warm woman who'd shown him kindness when he was just a stranger in the rain. Took his hand in hers, flour still dusting her fingers. "Then let me teach you," she said. "The way my father taught me to bake. One step at a time. Patient. Gentle." And there, in the dimness of her shop, Alexander Thornwood did something he hadn't done since he was a boy. He let himself be vulnerable. Let himself lean into her warmth. Let himself, just for a moment, stop being the Iron Duke. "I'm falling in love with you," he said. the confession torn from somewhere deep. And I don't know what to do about it. Helena's eyes shone with tears. I'm falling in love with you too. And I'm terrified. Why? Because you're a duke, and I'm a baker's daughter, and this can't possibly end well. He cupped her face in his hands, thumbs brushing away her tears. What if I don't care about that? But you have to care. Your duty, your position. What if, he said fiercely, I chose you anyway? And then he kissed her, and it was like coming home to a place he'd never been. Like thawing after a lifetime of winter. Like finally being allowed to feel. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Helena pressed her forehead to his. They'll never accept it, she whispered. Your court, your advisors. I don't care. You should. I won't let you destroy everything you've built for. For what? For love. He pulled back, met her eyes. Elena, I've spent 13 years being exactly what everyone expected. Being stone. Being cold. Being alone. And I'm so tired of it I could weep. Alexander. Let me be selfish. Just this once. Let me choose something for myself. She wanted to. He could see it in her eyes, the longing and the fear tangled together. But she was too wise, too aware of the cost. We need to think about this, she said. Really think. Not just feel. He knew she was right. Hated that she was right. 1 week, he said. Give me 1 week to find a way. To make this possible. And if you can't? The question hung between them, heavy with dread. Then I'll do my duty, he said, the words like a death sentence. I'll marry Lady Marguerite, and I'll never trouble you again. Helena nodded, tears streaming down her face now. 1 week. He kissed her once more, trying to memorize the taste of her, the feel of her in his arms. Then he left, before his resolve could crumble. Neither of them saw the figure watching from the shadows. Lord Pemberton, his weathered face creased with pain and memory, understanding far more than they knew. There comes a moment in every person's life when they must choose between the path laid out for them and the path they wish to walk. For the Duke, that moment came on a gray morning in late autumn, when he looked at his reflection and no longer recognized the man staring back. The week that followed was agony. Alexander Thornwood threw himself into finding a solution. He had faced war councils, political rivals, and the crushing expectations of a duchy. But nothing felt as impossible as this. He spent days buried in the castle archives, surrounded by parchment older than Thornwood itself. Candlelight flickered across his face as he searched for a loophole. A forgotten decree. A precedent. Anything that would allow a duke to marry a commoner. There was nothing. 800 years of tradition stood like a fortress wall between him and Helena Hartwell. He pressed his palms to the table, breath shaking. His father's voice echoed in his mind. Emotion is weakness. Duty is everything. For the first time, Alexander whispered aloud. Father, you were wrong. Then his aunt, the Dowager Duchess of Westmere, arrived unexpectedly on the 3rd day. She was his mother's sister, sharp-witted and observant. The Dowager Duchess swept into the study with the confidence of a woman who had survived 3 wars and 2 husbands. She took one look at her nephew, hair disheveled, eyes shadowed, and her expression softened. You're in love, she said, not a question. Alexander didn't deny it. It doesn't matter. Of course it matters. Who is she? A baker's daughter. Helena Hartwell. His aunt's eyes warmed. Thank the heavens it's not Lady Marguerite. That woman smiles as if she's plotting a coup. She could be. Is it the girl who saved you in the storm? I've heard about her. The village speaks highly of her. The village isn't the problem. The court is, the council. 800 years of tradition, yes, I know. She settled into a chair, studying him. Your mother married for duty, your father was chosen for her. She died desperately unhappy. I watched my sister fade, year by year, until there was nothing left but obligation. His aunt's voice was soft, sad. Is that the legacy you want to continue? Her words struck deeper than any blade. To become like your father. Cold, distant, alone even in marriage. What choice do I have? There's always a choice, Alexander. The question is whether you're brave enough to make it. He wanted to argue, wanted to explain all the reasons why it was impossible. But his aunt simply patted his hand and left him to his thoughts. That night, Lord Pemberton requested a private audience. The old advisor looked older than Alexander had ever seen him. Tired, worn, almost fragile. Your Grace, I must speak plainly. When have you ever done otherwise, old friend? Pemberton's face was grave. I know about the baker's daughter. And I know you're considering an unconventional choice. Alexander stiffened. If you're here to warn me. No. The word was quiet, shocking. I'm here to tell you not to make my mistake. Alexander blinked. Your mistake. The old advisor sank into a chair, suddenly looking every one of his 58 years. I was 25 when I fell in love. She was a merchant's daughter. Beautiful, clever, kind. I wanted to marry her. But my family said no. My duty was to marry nobility, to secure alliances, to think of my position. What happened? Pemberton's voice cracked. I did my duty. Married the woman my family chose. She was a good wife, gave me children, and I never loved her. Not the way I loved. He stopped, swallowed hard. Victoria died 10 years ago. She married a merchant. Had a good life. But I saw her once, years later, and the look in her eyes. She never forgave me for choosing duty over love. Pemberton. I've spent 30 years regretting that choice, Your Grace. 30 years wondering what my life might have been if I'd been brave enough to fight for her. Silence filled the room. He met Alexander's eyes. Don't make my mistake. Don't let fear and tradition steal your chance at happiness. Alexander felt something crack in his chest. The council will never accept it. Then make them accept it. You're the Duke. You have more power than you think. And if I fail, if I tear the duchy apart trying, then at least you'll have tried. At least you'll know you fought for something that mattered. Pemberton stood, placed a hand on Alexander's shoulder. Your father raised you to be stone. But your mother, she would have wanted you to be happy. To be human. For the first time, Alexander saw the man behind the advisor. The life unlived, the love lost. After he left, Alexander sat alone in the darkness, his aunt's words and Pemberton's confession echoing in his mind. And slowly, painfully, he began to see a path forward. It would require courage. It would require allies. It would require standing before his entire court and declaring his choice. Consequences be damned. But for Helena, for the chance at a life that was more than duty and loneliness, he would do it. He would fight. The next morning, Alexander began gathering his allies. His aunt pledged her support immediately. About time you do something interesting, she said with satisfaction. Sir Geoffrey, captain of his guard, was next. The man was common-born himself, knighted for valor, and he understood the weight of class divisions. He swore loyalty with a hand over his heart. I'll stand with you, Your Grace. And most of the guard will too. Father Benedict, the village priest who'd educated Helena, pledged his support and offered his blessing with quiet conviction. That girl has more wisdom and grace than half the nobility I've met. She'd make a fine duchess. And then, unexpectedly, Lady Marguerite Hampton requested a meeting. She entered with her usual poise, chin high, gown immaculate. But her eyes held something new. Resignation. I'm not a fool, Your Grace, she said coolly. I've seen how you look at her. I want a husband who loves me, not one who tolerates me. Alexander exhaled. I'm sorry. Don't be. I'm ambitious, not heartless. She smiled, sharp and calculating. Besides, your aunt has introduced me to the Duke of Ravenswood's nephew. He's young, handsome, and his duchy is twice the size of yours. I'll do quite well for myself. You're not angry. Her smile softened slightly. I'm practical. Besides, she added with a faint smirk, I prefer a man who actually smiles. With his allies assembled, Alexander called a formal court assembly. Every noble in the duchy was summoned. The great hall filled with curious, suspicious faces. Whispers swirled like smoke. The air crackled with tension. Lady Marguerite's father, Lord Victor Hampton, stood at the front, his face thunderous. He knew something was coming. Alexander stepped forward. No armor, no mask. Just a man ready to change the course of his life. "I have called you here to make an announcement," he began, his heart pounding but his voice steady. "For 13 years, I have ruled this duchy as my father taught me. With logic, with strategy, with duty above all else. I have been the duke you expected, the duke tradition demanded." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. "But I have also been alone, cold, disconnected from the very people I serve." He paused, his gaze swept the room. "Recently I met someone who reminded me that a duke is not just a title. He is a man. And a man needs more than duty to sustain him." Lord Victor stepped forward. "Your Grace, if this is about my daughter." "It is not. Lady Marguerite and I have spoken, and we are in agreement that our match would not serve either of us well." Gasps. Shocked. Whispers. "I intend to marry." Alexander continued, his voice growing stronger, "but not for alliance or politics or tradition. I intend to marry for love." "Who?" Someone called out. "Helena Hartwell, the baker's daughter from the village." The hall erupted. Shouts of outrage, disbelief, scandal. Lord Victor's face turned purple with rage. "This is madness," he roared. 800 years of tradition. 800 years of tradition. Alexander cut him off, his voice ringing with authority. "That has produced cold, distant rulers who knew duty but not compassion, who understood strategy but not humanity." He stepped forward, commanding the room. "I will not continue that legacy. The council will never approve. The council serves at my pleasure, Lord Victor. Not the other way around." Lord Pemberton stepped forward then, his voice carrying across the hall. "I support His Grace's decision. I have served 3 dukes, and I have never seen one with more potential for greatness than Alexander Thornwood. If he says this woman will make him a better ruler, I believe him." The Dowager Duchess rose. "I support my nephew. I knew his mother, and she would have wanted him to choose happiness over duty." Sir Geoffrey stood up. "The Guard supports His Grace. Father Benedict. The Church supports this union." One by one, Alexander's allies declared themselves. And slowly, grudgingly, but undeniably, the tide began to turn. Lord Victor made one last attempt. "And what of the girl? Has anyone asked if she even wants this? To be thrust into a world she knows nothing about, to face the scrutiny and judgment of the court?" A voice rang out from the doorway. "That," Helena said, stepping into the hall, "is an excellent question." Every head turned. Helena walked forward, unafraid. Her simple village dress looked out of place among velvet and jewels. And yet she carried herself with more dignity than any noble in the room. She looked terrified and brave and absolutely magnificent. She stopped before Alexander. "Helena," Alexander breathed. "You should have asked me first," she said quietly. "I know," he murmured. "I'm sorry. You just decided to append your entire life without consulting the person it most affects?" But her eyes were soft, shining with tears. "That's very ducal of you." A few nervous laughs rippled through the crowd. "I'm terrified," she continued, loud enough for everyone to hear. "I'm a baker's daughter. I don't know how to be a duchess. I don't know court politics or proper etiquette or how to navigate this world, Helena. But I know how to be kind. I know how to work hard. I know how to care about people, all people, not just the ones with titles." She took his hands in hers. "And I know that I love you. That you make me want to be brave enough to try." "You're already the bravest person I know," Alexander said, his voice rough with emotion. "Then ask me properly. In front of everyone. So there's no doubt, no question about whether I chose this." He understood. She was giving them both, legitimacy, making it clear this was her choice, not his imposition. Alexander Thornwood, Duke of Thornwood, dropped to one knee before a baker's daughter. The hall went utterly silent. "Helena Hartwell," he said, his voice carrying to every corner. "You have shown me that strength and tenderness can coexist. That duty and love are not enemies. That I can be both a duke and a man." He looked up at her, letting everyone see the love in his eyes. "Will you marry me? Will you stand beside me, not behind me? Will you help me be the ruler this duchy deserves?" Tears streamed down Helena's face. "Yes," she whispered. Then louder. "Yes." He stood, pulled her into his arms, and kissed her in front of the entire court. And when they broke apart, the hall erupted. Not in outrage this time, but in applause. But not everyone was happy. Lord Victor stormed out, and several other nobles followed. But most watched with something like wonder as their Iron Duke smiled, truly smiled, for the first time in anyone's memory. "Well," the Dowager Duchess said with satisfaction, "that's settled then." Church bells in the distance. If you had told the nobles of Thornwood a year before that they would dance at a village wedding, they would have laughed. If you had told the villagers their baker would become a duchess, they would have thought you mad. But love, as it often does, made fools of everyone's expectations. The wedding took place 6 weeks later, in the village church where Helena had been baptized. It was a small church, not grand enough for a ducal wedding by traditional standards. But Alexander insisted, and Helena was firm. She would marry in her father's church, or not at all. The church overflowed with an unprecedented mix of nobles and commoners. Dukes and duchesses sat beside bakers and blacksmiths. Nobles in velvet and jewels. Villagers in their best Sunday clothes. Children perched on windowsills. Even the castle guards stood shoulder to shoulder with farmers. Lady Marguerite attended with the Duke of Ravenswood's nephew, looking radiant and satisfied. Lord Pemberton stood as Alexander's witness, tears in his old eyes. Helena wore a gown of cream silk, simple but elegant, with wildflowers in her hair, courage in her heart. She walked down the aisle alone. Her father was gone, and she needed no one to give her away. She was giving herself, freely, by choice. Alexander waited at the altar in Thornwood black and silver, his face transformed by joy. Father Benedict performed the ceremony, his voice warm with blessing. "Marriage," he said, "is not the joining of two perfect people, but of two imperfect souls who choose to grow together, who choose love over fear, courage over comfort, hope over despair." Their vows were simple, human, true. When Alexander slipped the ring onto Helena's finger, a simple band of silver with a single diamond, his hands trembled. When Helena spoke her vows, her voice was steady and sure. "I promise to stand beside you, to challenge you when you're wrong, to support you when you're right, and to love you always. Not because you're a duke, but because you're Alexander. My Alexander." "I promise," Alexander said, his voice breaking, "to be worthy of you, to be the man you see in me, even when I can't see it myself. To choose love over duty, humanity over tradition, and you over everything." They sealed their vows with a kiss, and the church erupted in cheers. Outside, the village had prepared a celebration. Tables groaned with food, including Helena's honey cakes, baked that morning by Thomas, her apprentice, who was courting Mary the blacksmith's daughter and grinning like a fool. Musicians played, children danced, and for one perfect afternoon, the divide between noble and common seemed to disappear. The Dowager Duchess cornered Helena at one point. "You'll face challenges," she said bluntly. "The court won't make this easy. I know. But you have allies. And you have something more important. You have Alexander's love, and his respect. That's more than most duchesses can claim." She smiled. "Besides, I rather like the idea of shaking up 800 years of tradition." It was getting dreadfully dull. As evening fell, Alexander and Helena slipped away from the celebration. Warm lantern light glowed behind them, casting long shadows that swayed with their steps. Music drifted from the square, faint laughter, a violin, the hum of life continuing around them. They walked to the bakery, her bakery, though she'd turned its daily operation over to Thomas. Helena's voice barely rose above the breeze. "Are you sure about this?" Helena asked, standing in the doorway of her old life. "It's not too late to change your mind." Alexander stopped, turning to her. He cupped her face with both hands, gentle but certain. "I've never been more sure of anything." Her breath trembled. "I'm going to make mistakes. I'm going to embarrass you at court functions and use the wrong fork and you're going to be brilliant," he said firmly. "You're going to show them that a duchess can be more than ornamental, that she can be strong and kind and real. You have a lot of faith in me. You taught me how to feel again, Helena. You thawed a heart everyone thought was frozen." He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. "I have all the faith in the world in you." They stood there in the doorway, between her old life and her new one, and Helena felt the fear begin to ease. She was terrified, yes. But she was also loved. And she was brave enough to try. She leaned into him, letting the world fall away. "Take me home," she whispered. "Where's home?" "Wherever you are." And so Alexander Thornwood, the Iron Duke, carried his baker's daughter bride across the threshold, not of the bakery, but toward the castle, toward their future, toward a life neither of them had dared to dream possible. 6 months later, the Duchy of Thornwood was transformed. Oh, not in obvious ways. The castle still stood on its hill, imposing and ancient. The village still bustled with daily life. The nobles still schemed and politicked. But something fundamental had shifted. The Iron Duke, the man carved from ice, the ruler who never smiled, was gone. In his place walked a man transformed. He walked through his village regularly, speaking with his people, listening to their concerns. He smiled. He laughed. A sound no one had heard from him in over a decade. He was still brilliant in strategy, still commanding in presence, but the coldness was gone. And always, at his side, was his duchess, Helena Thornwood, once a baker's daughter, now the heart of the duchy. Helena had indeed made mistakes in those first months. She'd used the wrong title for a visiting dignitary, had served bread with her hands instead of tongs at a formal dinner, had once told a pompous lord that his policy was absolute nonsense in front of half the court. But she also changed Thornwood in ways no noble ever had. She revolutionized the castle's charity work, establishing a system to feed the poor that was efficient and dignified. She'd mediated a dispute between two noble families with such wisdom that both sides left satisfied. She'd won over the castle staff with her kindness and the guards with her courage. Most importantly, she'd shown the duchy that a duchess could be more than decorative. She brought warmth into the rooms that had been cold for generations. And the people loved her. Not because she was perfect, but because she was real. Lord Pemberton, watching her navigate a particularly tricky council meeting, leaned over to the Duke. "Your mother would have loved her." "I know," Alexander said softly. "I wish she could have met her. I think she knows. Somehow, I think she knows." Lady Marguerite, now engaged to the Duke of Ravenswood's nephew, visited occasionally. She and Helena had formed an unlikely friendship, bonding over the absurdities of noble life. "You're doing better than I would have," Marguerite admitted one afternoon over tea. "I would have poisoned half the court by now." Helena laughed. "The month isn't over yet." Thomas married Mary in the spring, in the same village church. Helena and Alexander attended, sitting in the back pew like any other villagers, and no one thought it strange anymore. The duchy prospered. With Helena's influence, Alexander's policies became more compassionate without losing their effectiveness. He was still a brilliant strategist, but now he considered the human cost of his decisions. He was still commanding, but now he led with respect rather than fear. One warm summer evening, as the sun dipped low behind the castle walls, Alexander and Helena walked through the gardens hand in hand. The roses were in bloom. The fountains glowed gold in the fading light. It was peaceful. The kind of peace Alexander had never known before her. Helena stopped suddenly. "Alexander." Her voice trembled. He turned to her, concern flickering across his face. "Yes, my love. I'm pregnant." He froze. For a heartbeat, he didn't move. Didn't breathe. Then joy broke across his face like sunrise. Then he swept her into his arms, spinning her around, laughing like a boy. A sound so free, so unguarded, that the gardeners paused in their work just to smile. "Careful." She protested, laughing too. "You'll make me dizzy." He set her down gently, reverently, his hands cradling her face. "A child," he breathed. "We're going to have a child. Are you happy?" "Happy." He kissed her, soft and sweet. He held her as if she were the most precious thing in the world. Because she was. "Helena, I didn't know it was possible to be this happy. I didn't know life could be this full." That night, lying in their chambers with Helena asleep in his arms, Alexander thought about the man he'd been 6 months ago. Cold. Alone. Convinced that duty and happiness were mutually exclusive. He thought about the storm that had thrown him from his horse, about a baker's daughter who'd offered him bread and tea and kindness, about the choice he'd made to fight for love instead of accepting loneliness. It hadn't been easy. There were still nobles who disapproved, still whispers about the common duchess. But there were also more smiles in the castle, more laughter, more life. And there was Helena, warm and real and brave, teaching him every day that strength and tenderness could coexist. He pressed a kiss to Helena's hair and whispered, "Thank you. Thank you for saving me." And so ends the tale of the Iron Duke and the baker's daughter. Their child, a daughter, was born the following spring, with her mother's warm eyes and her father's sharp mind. She grew up knowing both the castle and the village, comfortable in both worlds, running through marble halls with flower on her cheeks, learning diplomacy from her father, and compassion from her mother. And when she became a duchess in her own time, she ruled with a balance the realm had never seen. Tradition tempered by humanity, strength softened by kindness. Thornwood Castle itself changed. The duchy, once known for its coldness and its military might, became known for its justice, its warmth, its heart. Other duchies began to follow its example, and slowly, the rigid class divisions that had defined the realm for centuries between noble and commoner began to blur. And so ends the tale of the Iron Duke and the baker's daughter. The important thing, the thing to remember as you retire to your own warm beds, is this: love is not weakness. Softness is not surrender. Choosing happiness over duty is not selfishness. And sometimes, the bravest thing a person can do is allow themselves to feel. The Iron Duke learned that lesson in a bakery during a storm, from a girl who offered him bread and tea and saw the man beneath the title. And in learning it, he didn't just save himself. He saved an entire duchy. So the next time you stand at a crossroads, between what's expected and what's true, between duty and love, between being stone and being human, remember the Duke and his baker's daughter. Remember that the strongest hearts are the ones brave enough to be soft. And remember that sometimes, the greatest act of courage is simply allowing yourself to be happy. The fire burns low, but the story remains, passed from voice to voice, generation to generation. A reminder that love, true love, brave love, can transform not just two hearts, but an entire world. And if you ever wander through Thornwood, you might still hear the echo of a duke's laughter, and the soft hum of a baker's daughter, who changed history, with nothing more than kindness, and a loaf of warm bread. The end. If the tale of the Duke and the baker's daughter stirred something in your heart tonight, I'd love to have you stay a little longer. Subscribe to Royal Secret Flames for more whispered romances, moonlit confessions, and stories where love always finds its way home. Until our next story, may your evenings be gentle and your secrets safe with me.